Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Pleasure Alchemist. This conversation, chat is part of issue 6, which is, it's got the most amazingly juicy title. This issue is called Beautiful Disgust, Women, Horror, and the Pleasure of the Monstrous. Yum. And when I was thinking about putting this issue together, which I have for a while, some of you know that one of my loves is horror and that I'm writing more and more horror. It was very obvious to me that my guest today would be the gorgeous Nicole Burron, who, interestingly, this is the first time we've actually seen each other in person, which I think is wonderful. And I think we connected through some Facebook group. Then it was a horror group on WhatsApp. And then suddenly we're in our own conversation. And I've been super inspired by what Nicole shared. And we talk about horror and writing and the craft. And yeah, it's been really, really rich. So this feels absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to just introduce Nicole. I'm going to read her bio that she sent me. Nicole Burron writes horror about the systems designed to break us. Her protagonists are desperate, morally compromised, and capable of terrible things because the structures trapping them offer no ethical exits. Her work asks the questions we're afraid to answer. How far will you go when there are no good options? And what does it say about us that sometimes destruction feels like the only way out? Nicole, I think it's her first novella, if that's correct.
Yeah, my first novella. Mhm.
First novella, Pawn, Pawn, was published towards the end of last year, around October time. And there will be links to all the information about where to find Nicole, website, and a link for her book around below this video somewhere. So, welcome, Nicole. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I think, no, actually, no, you're not the first woman I've interviewed on here. There was somebody else who's also a writer and writes about bodies, not so much horror, but at the same time, yes, because she's writing about the ways that our bodies behave. And
Mm,
she really goes there with things. So in a way, she does write horror, but she doesn't kind of call it like that. We're both very interested in, I guess, the different aspects of horror, whether it's the psychological horror, whether it's to do with place. I know that's a big thing for you in what we've spoken about, whether it's to do with the impact of the body. And I really love from your bio where you spoke about because there's so much, isn't there? I think all stories, it's about choice. The protagonist
hmm.
makes a
Yeah.
choice, and there you
Hmm.
go. And then they make another choice. And there's that great thing, isn't it, of because of that, da, 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 da,
Yeah.
because of that, da, da, da. But I love the idea of what if our choices have become so limited that we have to actually turn towards making a choice that could be quite unreasonable, horrific, damaging, and destructive. Yeah, tell
Hmm.
me a little bit. I love your bio, and I love that that's kind of what you're interested in. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I really love I guess I lean more, I have in a past life, which really isn't a past life, but a handful of years ago, I used to teach shadow work. So I'm really interested in the psyche. I'm really interested in like inner parts, spirituality, and kind of like all those things. I think being human is beautiful and it's messy and it's complex, and there's no perfect way to be. And I live in, the United States, and we have some really messed up systems here. And it sometimes feels impossible I like to think of myself as a very ethical person, and I personally really struggle with the right thing to do,
Mm.
especially with systems that kind of make it really difficult because I struggle between like the good of the community and the whole versus self-preservation. It has to do a lot with like how I grew up and things like that. So I'm definitely like one of those writers that observe. So based on like conversations, I'm inspired by people that I meet and conversations I have and media I see. And those are the things that inspire me to write and motivate me. And I want to give a voice to.
I love it. It's very much the sense of responding, isn't it? And I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
artists do is we take in, whether it's conversation, whether it's the news, whether it's just everything. And I think that's the beauty and the power of art is then we can compost that somehow and then churn that out or vomit it out or however it wants to come out of us in a way that maybe makes that understandable, almost like in a metaphorical way, I think a lot of the time. We're not, it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like we're not staring directly at the sun, but we still get the same impact by taking in, whether it's a book or a movie or a piece of art and so on. It's making me think about ethics and horror. That's so interesting about like, are there ethics in horror? And it's also making me think about, is there truth or dare? One of those kind of movies where somebody asked that question, very much this
Mm-hmm.
of if you sacrifice yourself, the whole world survives. You know, one of those, or if you don't, everyone you know dies. What do you do, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very telling.
Yeah, and it's I think martyr being a martyr is just really normalized here in the States, especially in white culture and religious context for women. So that's definitely impacted my family, and so that's just like a little bit of a theme throughout with at least the novella is kind of like yeah, like how do you what do you sacrifice? What are the burdens? What's your responsibility? What isn't? That sort of thing.
Would you because I don't actually really know, you might have told me, so I apologize. But just so that those people that are listening know a little bit more about what is porn about? What's the story?
Yeah. You and I had a
Okay.
conversation about like synopsis and blurbs, and it's like our brains
Yeah,
go
we love
offline.
this.
We're so like deep into it now. I could talk about this for an hour. Like to summarize it up, I guess like instead of like the bio summary, because you can go on the website and read that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like for me, it was, I'll talk about like what inspired it. For me, it's a lot about debt and responsibility and loss and capitalism and consumerism. Spirit, debt in all forms, financial, spiritual. Um, it's just such a prominent thing here in the US with like our healthcare systems, and there's a little bit of that in there. And there's a little bit, I used to work in as a loan servicer for home mortgages, and I would have to call people before they hit foreclosure. And it was like one of the worst jobs ever. But there's a little bit of that in there too, of like, making deals. Like this is a very like feedback I've gone is very karmic. It's very deal with the devil. It's very you know, yeah, like those kind of things. And the synopsis, like I wish I could memorize it, but I can't for some reason.
Yeah, no, I totally, oh my God. I totally understand. But that sounds so interesting. That sense of transaction,
hmm
the transactions we make, thinking, I don't know, this is because there's the moral aspect, isn't it, of what if we're doing it because we've got a sick child? You know, you're talking about healthcare in the States. So
Yeah.
will you then go and do, and I'm thinking of a horrible horror film I'm not even going to mention here, but that there's a sense of that happening. So you make that choice, but you just get in deeper and deeper and deeper, and then
Yeah,
you're
that's kind of
completely.
my novella is similar. It's with the main character Mark, and his dad is in like a home for elderly, and he's not able to pay it, and so he makes a really bad deal because he's a house call only pawnbroker on the side, and a mechanic by day, and so yeah, he makes a little bit of a too good to be true deal so he can make that money. But again, you learn about Mark like is he there to take care of his dad, or does you have something he's trying to keep secret.
Oh, intriguing. I
Mhm.
like that. Mm. It's so what you said about, I know we've had a couple of conversations around this, and this, I think we've both got that kind of background in. Like, I used to be a yoga teacher, and Five Rhythms dance has been a practice of mine for 25 years. And so the kind of spiritual, I hate that word though, that kind of aspect is still
Yeah.
runs through like my bones
Yeah.
quite a lot. And then at the same time, I have this like obsessive fascination with horror and the psychology of horror. And sometimes if I'm feeling in a particular place, I can be about like, what's wrong with me? This is really not good to listen to this audiobook right now or put this movie on. It does do things to us. And somebody asked me recently, like, why do you like horror? And it's so weird. I'm trying to think back to like, oh God, is it because this happened? Maybe it's because stuff happened when I was young, and makes me think of Hellraiser, which is like one of my favorite movies. And that was a novella, wasn't it? Hellbound Heart, when Clive Barker um, wrote that. And then it obviously became like a whole franchise of movies of this sense of what's your pleasure. And there's a little bit of a kind of BDSM. I think there's kind of a little bit of that can come into things as well. Like, where do we find that line between pleasure and pain?
Mhm.
I think we all have it. And this goes back to what you were talking about with kind of shadow parts of us ourselves, of we all have not nice parts of us. We all have selfishness. We all have the ability to be a complete and utter asshole. We all can be possessive or jealous or resentful. And I also love working with those aspects because I think they kind of bind us so much in shame.
Mhm.
And I know for myself personally, I think writing horror and how it's been developing over the years, in a way, is a little bit of a response to those places in me of what if I gave this part a platform to play out in, and a world and other characters to be in relationship to, and just give that total permission, which we don't necessarily do in our own lives. So I'm curious about why you write horror, like if it comes from a similar place than that.
Yeah, I think it comes from that outlet. For me, horror is it really is um a place where I write out like I'm one of those people like I love patterns, and so I think that's also why I love storytelling. And when I can't like make sense of something or the pattern isn't shifting the way it needs to and things like that, I like to write about it. And I think for me it's a big grief outlet. These things that I also have what is it called? Delayed something. So when I learn something, I like people are like, "Do you got it?" I'm like, "Sure," but I have a delayed response, like a delayed
A
it's called something.
processor.
It's like yeah, that's it, delayed processor.
Oh,
So
I do as
sometimes in
well.
these okay, yeah. So like sometimes in these situations that, for me are horrific, that personally really challenged me, I wasn't able to really process and do the things I was able to do then. And so writing it out later kind of allows that delayed process part of me to be like, oh, we get to live this out a little bit.
No, isn't it really helpful to know this? Now that I know that's the case, because when something happens, I don't know if this is a similar experience. It's like I don't know how I feel. But then to know that I'm not going to know how I feel because it hasn't landed in me is really helpful rather than be like, why do I not feel anything? Or what's this? And then to kind of sit down, and you're making me think actually about, so a few years ago, maybe it was 2019, I think it was just before the pandemic, which is now like 7 years ago, which doesn't make any sense
And
whatsoever. Um, so one of the things that's been part of the scaffolding, I suppose, of everything that I learned and done in my life and now kind of put out and offer in service and so on, is a lot to do with my own mental health journey. And something happened to me through a teacher from a spiritual retreat. I'm not going to go too much into it, which she was like, oh, it was spiritual awakening. For me, I thought I was just going to end up in kind of mental institution for the rest of my life, quite honestly. But one of the things that was really helpful to me, and this did come from this teacher actually, was they suggested to me to get a notebook and to write all the stuff that I don't let myself own.
Mm.
And I filled three notebooks of pure vitriol, to be honest, nasty, and I'm not judging this now because I think this is great. This is in here, and I think it's in like all of us. But all of this stuff that just kept wanting to come out. And the weird thing was, Nicole, I could feel my life force coming back to me the more that I was doing that. It was like I literally had to purge all this
Mhm.
out of me, which feels in a way quite like a holy thing now I think about it, like almost like purging sin, but the sin wasn't, shame actually was the sin that I put on top, if you want to call it that, because that's what I learned from society of all this stuff that was saying I can't be this or I can't be that, I'm not allowed to feel that way. And that stays with me as such a powerful experience. It was like an exorcism. And I was working on
Mhm.
a market, Christmas market, selling like Irish booze while I was doing this behind the counter in moments when it wasn't busy. It was people walking past and like, fuck you, fucking wanker with your fucking husband and smiley child. And I was like, oh yeah, it feels good. So it's almost like the exorcism to come back alive again.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot, isn't there, in horror about these, well, demons, I guess, if you want to kind of, which could also be daemons, which are the really beautiful spirits of
Mhm.
creativity. Um, is there something like that you really, I don't know, it keeps coming around and around for you, like something you keep looking at maybe from different angles or perspectives that goes into your work, even if it's not, even if it's more subtle in places or larger in other places? I know these are not the
Mm.
questions that I set out for you whatsoever, but here we go.
Um, I am trying to think. And this might not be the answer that perfectly aligns with it, but I'm because I'm really consider myself an observer, like there's certain dialogues that go on. Um, and I'm like, I should write about that because not like I'm like I take everything a sign and angel numbers and stuff like that, but in a spiritual thing, I'm like, wow, this dialogue keeps coming out, or this pattern for people I know keeps coming up, and because I just love patterns. And that kind of always circles. Like if it feels like it's swirling around me through dialogue or patterns I'm noticing in people around me or just like current, at least here US society, that's as far as my brain can really
Yeah, no.
conceptualize um, without shutting down and being in a corner rocking back and forth. Um, and so I'm like, oh, this is active. So I'm an aliveness person, even though I like writing about sort of what feels like the path because writing takes time too. Um, and storytelling is like an eternal living thing. But when something's really alive with other people around me or kind of in the collective space here in the US, I'm
Mm,
like, because I know, right? Like, not everyone has a place for that to go or like a mirror to hold up. And I think as storytellers, that's kind of our calling is a
mm,
mirror to hold up. Just because I find horror especially very vulnerable and intimate. Um, and provocative even, so to invite people into that space, I want to have a reason. Like for me, even though I wouldn't say my like writing comes off like super like deep or whatever, but I'm always like I want someone to either relate to it or I want someone to feel seen by it or
mm,
even if it's icky for them, it's kind of like the summoning of it. I have a short story in a anthology, and a lot of there was some feedback that like some people were really turned off by it. Like they were like, I don't like this. And I'm like, well, good, because
mm,
it is not there to activate your agreeable parts. It's there to the story is horrific. It's kind of more patriarchal and like about teen girls and being desired and kind of like the male gaze and things like that and how like women kind of pit each other against each other. You know, I had someone say like that's not feminist and I'm like,
Ah,
but like the point of writing horror, right, is like even if you're disgusted by it, I'm glad you felt something.
yeah,
Even if you're like, I don't like that. That went against my morals like that. I'm like, cool, great. I was like, but you connected in some way if you realize it goes against your morals. You have connected with it. So for me, it's kind of like the um I almost want to say like a Freudian slip of reading, and I it always circles me being like, okay, what's the sort of subconscious thing I'm trying to plant in
yeah,
people, in the seed. So like for me, that's always circling me like in my work with the subconscious stuff. It's like subconsciously what's here. And some people it'll land that way and some people it won't. My goal also is like I want to make it entertaining. I want people to enjoy reading it. But what are the little seeds that I can plant for certain people? Because I know only certain people will be able to meet themselves as deeply or if they have similar experiences. So I'm not trying to like meet everyone, but I always want to have like I want to talk about this thing that no one else really wants to talk about. I like uncomfortableness and
oh
discomfort.
yeah, great. On the same page in that way. This again comes back to the ethical, isn't it? Because there's something about what I'm hearing from you is you write honestly. You write honestly
Mm,
around things that are important to you or that you're trying to work out, or that you almost like, well, I always have this. I love that. I talk about this a lot of the story of the emperor's new clothes and the little boy who's the only one to point out that the emperor has no clothes on. And I very much identify with that little boy. And people don't want to see that. And what you're just sharing there, I think is so interesting. God, it's like a whole conversation around, yeah, the male gaze, the female gaze. The male gaze is there, but there's something, isn't there, provocative, as you said, about an intelligent female writer writing the female gaze and pushing at that button because no, 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 you're not supposed to do that, you naughty, naughty, bad feminist like you got. But why not? Don't we feed into that as well? Aren't we competitive with each other as women? Don't we look at those shitty magazines? I don't anymore, I have to be honest. But I used to and be like, like, oh, so and so, they've put on like weight, they look like a normal woman. We've grown up with that, and it's such a separation wound between women to make us suspicious of each other, in competition with each other, rather than aligned and entrained with
mm,
as the powerful force that is. And that is a truth. And if we're aware of that, we can then go and play with that awareness. We're not being, stupidly doing that and blindly doing that. It's like I'm choosing to do this because I don't know, maybe want to see what that feels like to try that on and to have that gaze in that way and see what responses come up in my own system and what comes out in the characters that I'm writing because it's there anyway, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. It's a lot of like, okay, this is a horrible thing. I'm gonna make it worse.
Yeah,
Like,
which is great for a horror
yeah,
writer,
which
isn't
is
it? So how far can we go?
because it's like how can I make this like, things that we're aware of like even more horrifying, like more like "Bleh," repulsive or whatever it is. Um yeah, I like challenging people if I have the opportunity with that through a story. Storytelling's like one of our most ancient things as humans. Like we are built for storytelling, even if we don't write and we're consumers of storytelling, or we don't, do anything to like, I guess, share storytelling through media in that way. But I think it's just such a instinctual part of us, and such a like animalistic in some ways, like part of us. Like it's not, I don't think storytelling should be tamed. And I think that's what I love about horror. It's that space that goes, this is the space where it's okay to
Totally.
do that, right? And if someone's picking it up, they're consenting. So
Oh,
there's that as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to like kind of really address the fact and talk about. being a woman who writes horror, like for me, over the last few years, having discovered certain horror writers that I adore that are writing very clever pieces, that a lot of it is a mirror up to society and is um, shocking and subversive, unsettling, and not horror. I think sometimes when I talk about horror or horror books, I think you can kind of get a sense of traditional horror stories, like horror. And I'm not interested in that just for its sake. I'm interested in where there's kind of layers and something kind of
Yeah.
between, like between the threads of the carpet, almost up in the underlay of the
Mhm.
carpet. And that for me is more interesting because I think that's more complex, like being human is. And I
Mhm.
think there's a lot more, like there's such a rise right now of women horror creators, whether that is in literature, but also in certain movies as well. Like The Substance, we were talking about that before, is a woman director, Raw and Titane, Revenge is like yeah, her first film. They're all this woman directors, and I don't know, it's very interesting. For me, I'd be curious to kind of hear your thoughts around what do you think is going on that suddenly, or maybe I don't know if I'm just noticing it, but it does feel like it's suddenly much more out there of women writing horror and being quite acclaimed for that. And we were just touching upon before we started recording how the awards season right now that's going on, awards, I think it's the one that's just before the Oscars. Sinners, it's got loads and loads of awards and nominations. Amy Madison won for Weapons for her portrayal of Gladys, which is going to be made into a film as well. Like suddenly it's all okay. This is what's coming to my mind. It's almost like suddenly it's not hidden, which is interesting
Mm.
considering the state of the world and the horrors that are actually now not being, that are moving out from being hidden. But there's something about women writing horror that I think is really interesting right now. Like, are we suddenly reclaiming this? Like, what's going on? Well, I don't know. Curious about your thoughts as a woman
Yeah.
horror writer.
I mean, I take it as a great sign that the patriarchy is falling. Because, right, like women, and I'm not shitting on romance. I just don't read romance. I don't write romance. And I would say, like, I don't know if why can't I think of her name now? Like she's one of the most famous authors who wrote Interview with the Vampire.
Oh yeah, Anne Rice.
And Rice.
Yeah.
I think that maybe constitutes horror. I'm not entirely sure. I think it would. But it's very romantic in a lot of ways, right? And there's a lot of like those things. And I think like women, at least here in the US, are so perceived to be, like you said, like to not have those either like violent or dark or whatever it is sort of things that now that they're writing more of it, and I think people are hungry for that a little bit more. Their perspective of it is a great sign that women are not being confined to this one container of how they can be. But I also find like women storytellers are, at least in the horror that I read, they are so intimately connected to their characters and their protagonists. They are human first, from what I've read and read, not necessarily plot driven. Like the plot's there and stuff like that, but they there's just a I think like a humanity that women horror writers have. I think they care, they're empathetic. Like there's always like a little bit, I feel like you can tell when there's a little bit of empathy there, or like a little bit of like you had to know your protagonist in an intimate way, I think, to really get to this point in the plot or whatever it is. And so I think that appeals to people whether they realize it or not. I'm a character driven, not always, but I prefer character driven novels, whether they're written by men or women. But I think women just, there's an intimacy to it that I can't really find always with, male writers.
Interesting you're saying that. Yeah. And maybe that is because we're women reading these characters written. by women. So there's a recognition in some ways already, which we do
Mhm.
anyway. We can't help it. We're relational creatures, so we're automatically going to be looking for that sense of connection. That's very, I really like that. Yeah, and I really like that you use the word hungry for, because again, that there's something about this. I'm really fascinated by appetites that we've
Mm.
held back. You know, they're kind of pushing a salad leaf around a plate and fucking hell, and you're starving girl inside and actually then letting those appetites off the leash.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think for women, it's, oh, you have that in you. Me too. I've had these because they just don't, at least when I was growing up, like we did, me and my friends, close friends. But I think like it creates that like sisterhood in that way. Like, oh, it's the permission slip, I guess. Like I see more women in horror giving a permission slip to being like, hey, like you can write like dark stuff and you can have a cathartic experience through it, or you can write, about people in these ways and you're safe. Because I think women often they're always at risk, right? So like there's a safety, I think, beauty to horror too in that container of it.
It's almost like a kind of world within a world, isn't it? Because one thing about just watching or reading horror anyway in the safety of our homes is that already we're safe because we're
Yeah.
just doing this from, our sofa or but then actually adding an extra, almost like a Russian doll kind of thing of, yeah,
Hmm.
kind of then, like you say, women's experience and being able, and also, very obviously, it's a great place to put all this fucking frustration, put the rage, let the characters be destructive and act out upon what we can't. Because I think there's often, I mean, certainly very strongly right now, but there's always been there, hasn't there, about the injustices towards being a woman, like that you kind of have to be aware when you're walking around at night, or you won't go to certain places, or whether something has happened. There's a sense of helplessness and powerlessness that can come in, and I've written about this before, because we just can't. We can scream as much as we can, but sometimes there's just nothing that can be done, or the system is so fucking broke and corrupt that you just don't get believed or whatever. And there's, I think, writing horror is a way of reclaiming that power in some ways. And then maybe someone reading that can also feel a sense of that in themselves as well. So it's kind of almost like, psst, kind of pass this on. Here's a place to swallow, because stories and medicine aren't need to swallow this down, and kind of there's something really satisfying when you're reading the
Hmm.
story and the monster ends up being the woman and there's no retribution for them at the end, like the classic stories of you'll be punished as a woman for going off the rails, whatever. I like
Hmm.
those kind of stories as well. Of like, uh-huh, yeah, she's still out there, like
Hmm.
mm. What are your so okay, just gonna ask this question first. So kind of what we're talking about as well, there's a sense, isn't there? And I really think anyway that all stories are political,
Mm, yeah.
but particularly horror. And I think horror written by women, and particularly right now, is incredibly political. I don't know if you agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. I think it is. And it's kind of, I don't know if funny is the right word, but it's,
Horrifyingly funny.
yeah, I think how women especially have always handled politics is different than how men like handle it in some ways. And so I think there's so much that women are aware, like, mm, or maybe I should just speak for myself. Like I don't have like I don't feel violence in me. Like I don't like my instinct, unless someone was like really attacking me, my instinct isn't like just to go to violence instantly, right? My instinct is like, what can we do to get into the person's mind, which is why I like to plant the seeds to make them think differently. And for me, like when it comes to politics and things like that, I kind of live in an echo chamber because I live in Portland. Like,
Okay.
so like
Yeah.
To me, it feels a little like silly to like be like political because it's like I don't really know anyone who is has different,
So
politics, yeah, like than I do. So it kind of feels like a little bit of an echo chamber.
until you put your work out.
Yeah, and then you put your work out and you reach other people, right? And I know at least for myself, if I'm affected by so much with policy here in the States. We're not, there's just so much crap here. So like to kind of fight those systems through art just feels very feminine to me.
Yeah.
And something that can stay forever. Like a book, it can go in circulation forever, right? And so someone else could pick it up later on and be like, oh my gosh, it's sort of like capturing history too in a way, like being like, hey, this is, my story takes place in the year 2000 to kind of show that nothing really has changed. Now we're in 2026. And so I kind of wanted to show like nothing's really changed with, because some people are like, oh, I relate to the debt and the healthcare. I'm like, 26 years later, nothing's changed, like
Yeah.
that should drive you a little mad. Like that should burn a fire under you in some way. So for me, like writing as a political act really feels in my feminine because it's through art rather than um, letting my frustration, anger be a violent physical attack on others.
This is that bit, isn't it? Going right back to what we started with, from your bios, like if you've, you know, we have a certain amount of privilege that we can,
Mhm.
right? That we have the capacity, that we feel safe enough to, in all of this aspect, to put that destructiveness into through art,
Mhm.
and make something from that. Um, and I think it's interesting you say about that. You see that as a kind of quite a feminine aspect. I haven't really kind of necessarily thought about that. I know for me, anything to create anything, even if it's like putting on a really nice outfit or wearing gorgeous underwear or I don't know, arranging flowers in a certain way. Like I think all of these things right now, I feel like noticing beauty in the world and how we can invite that in very small ways, or whether it's through art and or whatever it might be, is a way, is an antidote to what's going on out in the world. And it can seem a bit like, oh, that's so fucking twee, or why are you writing a book? Often I see these memes on my Instagram of like the world's burning and there's a writer going, oh, I'm writing my next book. And but I think this is the key, that we have to keep creating, we have to keep making, we have to keep noticing where beauty is, where we're touched by life and connection, because all of the what's going on can just cause all of that to like wither away. And then what are we left with? That for me is the real
Mhm.
horror.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's true beauty. It's not the vacuous beauty. Like I'm watching Ryan Murphy's The Beauty. I don't know, you're watching that at the moment. Do you like Ryan Murphy's
I do
American
love
Horror
Ryan.
Story? Oh, The Beauty is good.
I haven't watched that one yet.
Okay, it's still going. I think there's two episodes left. I think we're up to episode 10. I think it was 12 episodes, maybe 10 or 11. It's really good. Highly recommend, especially if you're a Ryan Murphy fan. I love all his drama. I love there's always beautiful naked people wandering around, and it's very like dramatic. But I think he's
Yeah.
got some great ideas. Watch it. I think you'd like it. But this whole sense of yeah, the kind of vacuous beauty or the surface beauty, that is horrifying. But that's a whole other kind of topic as well. Like, but that's why I think I recommended Rouge by Mona Awad to you, because that touches on that and it's an incredible book. It's very cool. So, a couple more questions for you. What's your favorite horror? Do you have any favorite horror books or writers or movies?
Oh gosh. One of the first horror books I fell in love with, and it probably wasn't age appropriate for me. I think I was 15, is Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright.
Hmm.
Um, And then, in sort of a cliche way, I love Stephen King, but I would say more, I read a lot more of his older stuff. Like I reread The Shining once every few years. It's one of my favorite books. It's one of the only horror books that scares me. But it's a connective thing because of the addiction of the main,
Mm.
um, and like the family dynamics, stuff like that. So for me, it's kind of like a therapeutic experience, but it still scares me. And the movie is, I think, one of the most beautifully tension, psychological driven, captured horror movies ever. I would say that's probably my favorite horror movie. It's between that and Heredity. Like Heredity
Oh,
to me is yeah, like that one. I was like, oh, like it was just such a visceral response watching that. Like I love that movie. Trying to think of like other horror movies. I feel like I consume so much horror that it's hard for me to
yeah.
remember. Like, I read a book last year, but I think it came out in 2024, 2023, called Model Home. And I believe the author is River Soman. Um,
I know that.
I can't remember if they live in the UK or not. Maybe they did. Um, their book's very political. I haven't read the other stuff yet, but I really loved their author voice. And
Mm.
that's about a Black family's experience of living in a posh, gated community, white community in Texas. So that really, um,
Mm.
you know, to me, that's a different kind of horror, but I really like horror like that, where it's really intimate that way, and that they're sharing their personal experiences. Like I think that's a really tender kind of horror to write and read, and connect with. I'm trying to think what
Do
else.
you have
I
like a
always
guilty, not a guilty, but no, that's the right word, a comfort horror? I have my comfort horror movie, and it's just so random. It's not my favorite horror, but it's my comfort is The Ruins.
Oh yeah, you told me that. Yeah.
It's so weird. I've watched that it's really nasty as well, those of you that the book is worse. It's interesting now we're having this conversation because it's a male author that wrote the book and it is different what happens to the
Mm.
characters and the order that they die and whatever. But there's something quite cold about it. And I wonder if that's something in kind of some of those kind of books. But it's a comfort film.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what I call good horror. Like I think good horror is that in the sense of like not talent, but how it connects to you. And this isn't to say, it's personal. It's good horror that's personal, like personal good horror. Like for me, it's that, oh, I have to read this again because I'm just connected to it in some way, and it's therapy in some way.
Yeah. Weaverworld was my book in my early 20s. What reading Weaverworld, Clive Barker just blew my mind because it suddenly felt like, oh, I'm reading some horror that has a lot to say here. And that felt really, and then I binged like all his books. And it's really scary and also very like, he's very, I don't know, he talks a lot about what goes on in Hollywood and all the stuff that actually right now you're thinking that guy knew
Mhm.
stuff, man. Um,
Yeah.
it's very cool. So I have one more question to ask you, and I ask this for everybody that comes on because this is the Pleasure Alchemist magazine, and pleasure is defined by so many ways, but one of the main ways I like to talk about in here is that place of aliveness, when we feel
Mhm.
like through us. So, any tips for anybody who is watching this for when you need that boost of that aliveness? Like, are there any places that you go to that
Mhm.
really kind of refill your well?
So I love driving around in my car and then putting headphones on, running errands, listening to music. There's something about staying busy and like kind of, I shouldn't say like turn my brain off when I'm driving, but you know what I mean? Like something that doesn't take any of my creativity but I'm moving. So my body's happy because it's moving and I feel productive. And so I start getting that productive rhythm, right? Of like, oh, I'm doing something. But that's where like a lot of my ideas will come and it's just like, oh, it's so yummy. Like all of a sudden, like that burst of dialogue, it's like, oh my God, there it is. It's so yummy. I love this so much. Um, I'm like so I think for me, what brings those things to life is dialogue. Like if I don't um communication between people feels so just alive to me. And it's so special, I think, to capture that in a story because we talk all day long and we don't really think about, oh, we're not going to say those exact words ever again. Like we
Mm.
probably will never have this exact same conversation. So it's kind of like a sacred, like catching a firefly or a butterfly for a brief moment. And that feels really, really alive to me. I love tension between people and relational things. So yeah, I think dialogue and then just like keeping my body, or I'll walk my dog, like keeping my body busy. So I'm like started to get in that, oh, I have a body. Oh, I have, I'm very much alive. I have little things to do, but then also being able to like get stuck in my music and
The best.
go to a
I had
different
that
world.
yesterday. I had a music day yesterday where everything was accompanied by my headphones, and I forget. I'm like, oh yes, this is great. So what's next for you? Like, what are you working on anything right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working on a couple things. I'm working on hopefully what's going to be a full-length novel. I have a couple short stories I'm working on. Yeah, I have an anthology I'm gonna or a magazine that I'm submitting to. I think it's mostly usually motherhood, but their theme is holding. So I'm gonna submit to that. And then I have like, a couple short stories that are just kind of like pitter patters right now. But my novel is like my baby right now. And for me, it's gonna be a challenge because I'm gonna do it in first person, which I've never done before.
Oh God, talk about getting
Yeah.
more, because you've mentioned a few times about that intimacy of horror. It's been something that's been a theme. So now you'll realize I'm pulling up a chair. I'm not in the
Yeah.
director's seat anymore. I'm here on the stage.
It's
Oh,
been interesting to write because like when you write like from the broader perspective, you still had it like you play like you're playing God a little bit. You're like, here you go. I mean, I always like to let the protagonist tell me what they're gonna do next, like at some point. Like that's just how it always goes for me. I think most writers experience that. Like you think one thing's gonna happen, and then you're like, oh no, they wouldn't do that. Like this is what they would do. And I love the liveness of that too, like the discovery of like, oh, I'm meeting a new person. But doing it in first person is very like somatic. Like I have to be so much more in my body. And as someone with a lot of trauma, that has been like that's stretching new muscles for me.
oh, that's so interesting. Is this the house story? The one that you're writing in first
No,
person? No, the
no,
one
this
that you
is
came to you, the download.
one that came to me. Yeah, so a little more like about like
Oh,
my experience of like living in LA and spirituality and kind of that it's, I don't even know what to like put it in the genre at. It would probably fall under like pink horror. Um,
mm.
I want it to feel like a light read at first and then get more unhinged as you go along. Like I want it to feel superficial when you first start reading and then like it progresses. So I'm really excited and I hope it transmutes that way. But yeah, writing in first person is like I tried messing around with things and I was like, and I knew in my gut, right? I was like, I have to do this in first person. And I was like, damn
Mm.
it, I have to get out of my
Wow.
comfort zone.
Isn't that the point?
hmm
That's part of that edge, isn't it? Not just the writing
Yeah.
and material, but the ways of doing things. That is so delicious. I'm very excited for you, and obviously looking forward to hearing about it. And there's more. There's more, Nicole, because also in this issue, there's the first chapter of Porn.
hmm
Yeah, so you can go ahead and read that, and then there'll be a link to order a copy afterwards. And if you have any questions for us, then obviously let us know. Let us know what you think about this conversation. Has it inspired anything new? Has it made you think about horror in a different way, particularly if you're in a female body? How has that impacted you? We'd really love to know. I think it's great. And one of the big things that about doing these conversations with beautiful, amazing people is to provoke conversation. I think that's really important is to have these conversations around different aspects of things that maybe are a little uncomfortable or unfamiliar or something that maybe would kind of go like that with. It's always interesting what it brings up. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. And thank you, Nicole. I love this. I suddenly was like, oh shit, what
Happy.
time is it? Because maybe I'll have to have you on again another time. But I really appreciate chatting with you and I feel very inspired. So thank you. And hopefully see you
Thank
again.
you.
Bye.